She married my father, she moved into our home, but every time she looked at me, I felt something I couldn't explain. She was confident, beautiful, and knew exactly what she was doing. At first, I tried to ignore it, but the way she touched my hand, the way she whispered my name, it wasn't motherly, and I didn't want her to stop. Julia stood by the large bay window of the apartment, her gaze drifting over the sprawling cityscape as twilight descended. The city lights flickered to life, casting a warm, golden glow on the glassy surfaces of skyscrapers, and the distant hum of traffic filled the air like a familiar lullaby. Outside, life moved in its predictable rhythm, people rushing home from work, street vendors setting up for the evening, and the occasional laughter drifting from open windows. Yet inside Julia's carefully maintained world, a different kind of stillness reigned, one fraught with tension. It had been just a week since Alex, Daniel's younger brother, the one she barely remembered from the early days of her they had talked for hours. Alex's stories of far-off plaque. As the evening wore on, Julia felt herself drawn toward him in ways she hadn't anticipated. There was, in the days since, Alex's visits had become more frequent. She often caught herself watching Alex from across the room, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the casual grace in his movements. It was a silent invitation, a challenge wrapped in the softness of familiarity. That night, as Julia lay awake in the dark, the silence pressed against her like a weight. Her thoughts tumbled over one, and she wondered what it meant to love and to betray, to crave and to resist. And in that quiet solitude, Julia realized her heart was no longer hers alone. It belonged to a silent temptation, one that whispered in the shadows and promised both risk and reward. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains. Daniel was already gone when she stepped into the kitchen. The usual, Julia poured herself a cup of coffee, the bitter warmth grounding her as she tried to make sense of the whirlwind inside her. Her mind kept returning to Alex, the way his presence had stirred something the unspoken tension between the brothers weighed heavily on her conscience. Daniel and Alex had never been close, their relationship marked by distance and occasional friction. Yet Julia had unwitty, she remembered the brief phone call with Daniel the previous night, his voice. Her phone buzzed unexpectedly, breaking her train of thought. A message from Alex, or the simple words sent a thrill mixed with dread. Julia hesitated, fingers trembling as she typed a cautious reply, yes. The hours stretched ahead, each minute thick with anticipation and fear. What would Alex want to say? What did she want to hear? And, most importantly, what was she willing to risk? That evening, Julia arrived at a quiet cafe tucked away from the bustle of the city. The warm glow of lamps and Alex was already there when she entered, seated at a corner table with a calm expression that masked the intensity she sensed beneath. His eyes met hers, and they talked, at first about trivial things. The weather, their daily lives, but gradually the conversation deepened. Alex's voice lowered, filled with a raw tones. I know this is complicated, he said quietly. Julia swallowed. Alex reached across the table, his hand brushing. We don't have to say everything right now, he said gently. Sometimes, Julia nodded, torn between the comfort of his understanding and the crushing weight of the secrets they shared. As they parted that night, the silent temptation lingered, a promise and a warning woven into every glance, every unspoken word. Julia woke to the soft patter of rain against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the fluttering in her chest. The previous evening's meeting with Alex lingered in her mind like a delica. She moved through the morning routine almost mechanically, her thoughts tangled between the warmth of Alex's touch and the cold distance of Daniel's absence. The silent, at work, Julia found it harder to focus. The subtle thrill of anticipation mixed with guilt. Later that day, Alex sent a text, can we meet? I need to talk. The urgency in the words sent a shiver down Julia's spine. That evening, they met at a secluded park, the rain having softened to a gentle drizzle. The world around them felt muted, as Alex's eyes searched hers, filled with a mixture of longing and uncertainty. Julia, this isn't just a fleeting moment for me. Julia's heart ached with the weight of his confession. But what about Daniel? What about the life He reached for her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. I'm not asking you to make a choice now. Just to be honest with yourself about what you want. The lines between right and wrong blurred in the rain-soaked shadows. Julia as they stood together, soaked by the rain yet untouched by the cold, Julia knew that the moment of crossing had arrived. The messy, complicated journey of love, loyalty, and desire was only just beginning. The first light of dawn crept hesitantly through the curtains, casting a pale glow across Julia's bedroom. The familiar surroundings Julia's mind drifted back to the moments before midnight, to the message from Alex that had arrived unexpectedly, "We need to talk, in person." Those few words ignited a storm inside her, flooding her with for days, the tension between them had simmered beneath the surface, a delicate balance of stolen glances and half-spoken words. Yet that message shattered the fragile truce, pulling them toward a confrontation long overdue. Rising from the bed, Julia moved silently to the window, pushing back the curtain to reveal a gray sky heavy with the THR. Her thoughts raced, circling the impossible choices ahead. Daniel, the man she had promised forever to, was miles away, immersed in a world of work and obligations. His absence had become a familiar ache, but what was unbearable now was the growing distance between the husband she loved and the desires she could no longer suppress. Her phone buzzed again, a reminder of the meeting she could no longer avoid. She hesitated before typing a reply, where? They settled on a small, tucked-away cafe, a place shielded from the prying eyes of acquaintances and the judgments of society. Julia arrived early, nerves twisting in her stomach as when he appeared, his presence filled the space with a quiet intensity. The years abroad had changed him. They sat across from each other, the table between them laden with untouched coffee cups and the weight of unspoken truths. Alex's voice was steady but edged with pain. "Julia, this isn't just a passing thing anymore. I care about you, more than I should. But living with this secret is tearing me. She met his eyes, the conflict within her reflected in his own. "I feel it too," she whispered. "But the guilt, it's crushing. Daniel has been everything to me, but these feelings, they're real." Their hands found each other across the table, fingers intertwining in a desperate grasp for connection. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through Ju. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening," Alex continued. "Maybe it's time to face the truth, no matter how painful." Tears welled in Julia's eyes as the enormity of their situation settled over them. The cafe around them buzzed with life. Conversations, laughter, the clatter of cups, but inside, time seemed to slow. Trapping them in a moment suspended between hope and despair, they talked for hours, bearing their souls in whispered confessions and hesitant promises. They spoke. When they finally parted, the night had deepened into a quiet darkness, stars twinkling overhead like distant witnesses. Julia walked home with a heavy heart, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down with every step. Her messy heart was no longer silent, it screamed with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. The soft morning light crept slowly through the thin curtains, illuminating Julia's bedroom with a muted glow. She lay curled beneath the blankets, her mind replayed the quiet moments in the cafe, the hesitant touch of Alex's hand. The trembling in his voice, the shared tears and unspoken promises. Those moments, though brief, had shattered the fragile illusion of control. Julia slowly rose from the bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The apartment was still and silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. She moved to the kitchen, preparing a cup of coffee with shaky hands, each movement mechanical, detached. The bitter aroma filled the room, but it brought no comfort. Her phone vibrated softly on the counter, pulling her from her reverie. A message from Alex appeared. "Can we talk? It's urgent." The simple word sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins, mingling hope with dread. Julia hesitated, fingers trembling as she typed a cautious reply, "Where?" They arranged. As dusk fell, Julia arrived at the park, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. The fading light cast long shadows across the winding paths, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze created a soothing backdrop for the tense conversation ahead. Alex was already there, pacing nervously near a sec. When Julia approached, his eyes softened, and he offered a tentative smile. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, they sat down side by side, the space bee. Finally, Alex broke the quiet. "Julia, I can't keep doing this, pretending we can compartmentalize our feelings. Live separate lives with this secret eating away at us." Julia swallowed hard, nodding in agreement. "I know. It's tearing me apart." His voice grew softer, almost a whisper. "We need to face the consequences, whatever they may be. We owe it to ourselves and to Daniel." I don't want to hurt Daniel," she said, voice breaking. "He's been my rock, my partner for years." Alex reached out, taking. Tears streamed down Julia's cheeks as the enormity of the moment sank in. The messy heart she had tried to silence now screamed for freedom, for truth, for a chance at redemption. In the days that followed, Julia found herself caught in. Daniel's phone calls became more frequent, filled with questions and subtle suspicions. Julia struggled to maintain amidst the turmoil. Julia sought solace in quiet moments, early morning walks, late-night journaling, and the rare phone calls with trusted friends who offered comfort without judgment. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril. But Julia resolved to face it with courage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Julia sat alone on the balcony, the cool breeze whispering through the leaves. Her phone buzzed, a message from Daniel: "We need to talk when I get back." Her breath caught in her throat. The inevitable confrontation loomed, and Julia knew that her life was on the cusp of irrevocable change. With tears in her eyes but determination in her heart, she whispered to the night, "I'm ready." The days that followed Julia's whispered. Her home, once a sanctuary of comfort, and Julia's routine was a haze of work and restless nights. She busied herself with tasks and errands, hoping to distract her mind from the inevitable reckoning. But every message from Daniel, every voicemail left unanswered, pulled her deeper into the storm. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled softly in the distance, Julia sat curled on the couch, phone in hand. A message popped up from Daniel: "I'm coming home tomorrow. We need to talk." The word sent a jolt through her, a mixture of relief and terror. The moment she had dreaded was finally at hand. When Daniel arrived the next day, the air between them was thick with tension. He looked tired, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there before. They sat in the living room, the space feeling too small to contain the swelling emotions. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Julia, I know something's wrong. I can feel it." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. The confession spilled forth, the late-night meetings with Alex, the stolen moments, the growing turmoil inside her heart. Daniel listened, his expression unreadable, a mixture of pain and shock. When she finished, the room was silent save for the steady. Daniel's voice was low and steady. "I'm hurt. Betrayed. But I want to understand." Julia reached for his hand, her own trembling. "I never meant to hurt you. I was lost, and Alex. He was there." The weeks that followed were filled with difficult slowly, they began to rebuild, not the naive trust of the past, but a deeper, more honest connection forged in the crucible of pain and forgiveness. Julia learned that truth was heavy, but it was also freeing. In honesty, there was a charm, and though the scars would remain, Julia and Daniel found a new way forward, imperfect, fragile, but real. The morning sun streamed softly through the bedroom window, casting a warm glow on Julia as she lay awake beside Daniel. The quiet rhythm of his breathing was a comforting reminder of the fragile peace that had begun to settle between them. Yet, beneath the surface, Julia turned to watch Daniel's face, tracing the familiar lines that told. The wounds of betrayal were still raw, but in their honesty, Julia and Daniel had begun to rebuild something stronger. Not the perfect love of fairy tales, but a resilient bond. The day began with a simple breakfast, the clinking of dishes and the aroma of fresh coffee filling the kitchen. Julia watched as Daniel prepared their meal, his movements deliberate and calm. They exchanged smiles, small gestures of connection that felt monumental after months of distance. As they ate, their conversation flowed more freely than it had in a long time, memories of happier days, plans for the future, and the cautious sharing of fears and dreams. The openness was both exhilarating and terrifying, revealing the fragile state of their hearts. Later, they visited the counselor, a space that had become a sanctuary for their healing. The sessions were challenging, unearthing buried emotions and confronting uncomfortable truths. Yet, with each conversation, Julia felt the counselor emphasized the importance of patience and communication, guiding them to listen with compassion and speak with honesty. Julia and Daniel practiced these lessons. Outside, spring had blossomed into summer, the world around them vibrant and alive. Julia found solace in nature's renewal, taking long walks and savoring moments of quiet reflection. The changing seasons mirrored her own transformation, from despair to hope, from silence to voice. Daniel reached for Julia's hand, his eyes filled with a tenderness that stirred something deep within her. "Thank you," he whispered. "For staying. For fighting with me." Julia smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're not perfect. But we're real. And that's what matters." The fragile foundations they had rebuilt were vulnerable, but they were theirs, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the messy, Julia knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in a long while, she believed in the possibility of a future together, and that belief was enough to keep her moving forward. The air was thick with the scent of freshly bloomed jasmine as Julia stepped onto the balcony. The soft light of dusk wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. The city below buzzed quietly with the fading energy of the day, but here, above the chaos, there was a rare and precious stillness. A fragile moment suspended in time, where hope dared to flicker amidst the shadows of past Julia's fingers curled around the cool metal railing as she breathed deeply, tasting the crisp evening air. For so long, she had been caught in a whirlwind of guilt and uncertainty, her heart battered by secrets and shattered promises. Yet tonight, beneath the canopy of stars just beginning to peek through the darkening sky, a tentative calm had set. She thought back to the weeks of healing, the therapy sessions filled with tears and hard truths. The long conversations with Daniel where silence often spoke louder than words, and the small moments of laughter that had begun to stitch their fractured souls back together. The journey had been anything but easy, but with each step, the weight of the past seemed to lift just a little. Daniel's voice called softly from Incy. She turned and smiled, the warmth in her chest spreading like the glow of the setting sun. "I'll be right there." As Julia moved through the apartment, the familiar zone, sitting down, Julia felt a swell of gratitude and love for the man who had weathered the storm beside her. Daniel caught her gaze, his eyes reflecting the same flicker of hope that danced within her. "Thank you for sticking with me," he said quietly. Julia reached across the table, her hand resting over his. "Thank you for fighting for us." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, plans for the weekend, memories from years past, dreams for the future. The ease between them felt almost unfamiliar, but all the more precious for it. Later, as night deepened, Julia sat by the window with her journal, the soft scratch of pen on paper a soothing balm to her restless thoughts. She wrote of healing, forgiveness, and the messy, beautiful truth of love, imperfect but enduring. Her words traced the contours of her heart, capturing the complexities that defined her journey. The messy heart that had, in the weeks that followed, Julia and Daniel continued to rebuild, one fragile step at a time. They cultivated patience and understanding, learning to listen and to speak with honesty. Trust, once fractured, began to mend in the quiet spaces. Julia found herself opening up to friends and family, breaking the silence that had once enveloped her. The vulnerability was daunting, but also liberating, a vital part of her healing. Though challenges remained, the flicker of hope kindled a steady flame, guiding them toward a future where love could thrive once more. Julia knew that the road ahead was far from certain. The scars of the past would always linger, reminders of the pain and mistakes that shaped her. But in the embrace of forgiveness and resilience, she found the courage to face each new day. The silent temptation that once threatened to consume her had transformed, and with that flicker of hope burning bright, Julia stepped forward, ready to write the next chapter of her story. The days stretched long and heavy, and Julia found herself walking through a fog of uncertainty. Though the flicker of hope had sparked between her and Daniel, shadows lingered, shadows of doubt, fear, and the lingering echoes of past mistakes. The fragile peace they had begun to nurture was constantly tested by the weight. Julia sat by the window one rainy afternoon, watching droplets race down the glass as the sky wept softly above the city. The muted grayness outside mirrored the tempest within her. Despite the progress they had made, she felt an undercurrent of tension weaving. Daniel was working late again, caught in the relentless demands of his career. His absence, though less frequent now, still cast a hollow space in the home they were trying to rebuild. Julia wondered if the distance between them was physical or something deeper, an emotional chasm that no amount of therapy or conversation could fully bridge. The silence between them had grown thick on some evenings, filled with hesitation and the unsaid. Julia longed to break through, to speak honestly about her fears and insecurities, but often found herself retreating into quietude instead. The messy heart she carried was complicated, filled. One night, Daniel returned home later than usual. The house was dark when he stepped inside, the only light coming from the soft glow of the television in the living room. Julia was curled on the sofa, a book forgotten in her lap as her thoughts churned. They exchanged a cue. Julia's heart clenched. She nodded slowly, setting the book aside. They moved to the dining table, the space between them wide, and waited. Daniel took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened. And I don't want to lose what we have." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Me neither. But I can't pretend that things are simple. There are shadows hanging over us, questions that need answers." They spoke for hours, peeling back layers of doubt and fear. Daniel voiced his lingering insecurities, the moments when he felt unsure if Julia shared her struggles with guilt and self-forgiveness, the battle between holding on and letting go. In the vulnerability of their conversation, something shifted. The shadows that had once threatened to unravel them began. In the days that followed, Julia and Daniel continued to confront the shadows. They sought new ways to communicate, to support each other, and to rebuild trust. It was not easy. There were setbacks, moments of frustration, and times when the weight of the past threatened to crush their frag, but in the quiet moments, shared smiles, gentle touches, the simple comfort of presence, they found strength. Julia realized that love was not about perfection, but about resilience, the courage to face the messy, tangled realities and to choose hope despite them. And as the seasons shifted once more, the shadows that had haunted them began to dissolve, revealing a path forward bathed in the soft light of possibility. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the bedroom where Julia lay awake, her thoughts a swirl of emotions. The weight that had pressed on her chest for months, the tangled web of secrets, betrayals, and heartache, was beginning to lift, replaced by a fragile yet resilient hope. Across the room, Daniel stirred, the familiar rise and fall of his breathing a comforting rhythm. For the first time in a long while, Julia felt a quiet peace settle over her, a peace born not from perfection but from the courage to face the messy truths of their shared past. Their journey had been fraught with pain and uncertainty. The affair with Alex, the whispered silences, the confessions and confrontations, all had left scars, but they had also laid bare the depth of their love and the strength of their commitment. Julia rose and joined Daniel by the window, their hands finding each other naturally. The small touch spoke volumes, of forgiveness, vulnerability, and the unspoken promise to rebuild together. In the months since Daniel's return, they had work. They learned to communicate not just with words but with patience and empathy. Julia discovered the power of forgiveness, both of herself and of Daniel, and Daniel embraced the vulnerability that came with letting go of pride and anger. Their love, once fraught, life outside their home continued its relentless pace, but within their walls, a sanctuary of understanding and grace had been forged. Julia and Daniel faced challenges still, moments of doubt, the occasional shadow of the past, but they met each one with resilience and renewed commitment. Julia also found a way to make peace with Alex, who had quietly stepped back from their lives with dignity and respect. Though his presence remained a bittersweet memory, Julia's heart no longer carried the weight of betrayal but the lightness of acceptance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Julia and Daniel sat together on Daniel turned to Julia, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Thank you," he whispered. "For fighting for us." Julia smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of dusk, they found not an ending, but a beginning, a new chapter shaped by the messy, imperfect, and enduring nature of love. Silent temptation ends not with tidy closure, but with the profound truth that love's greatest strength lies in its capacity to endure, to forgive, and to grow beyond the shadows. Julia and Daniel's story is a testament